Yes.
The state calls Daniel Baker. May I inquire?
You may.
Good afternoon. Please state your name for the record.
Daniel Baker.
Where do you currently work?
I work for the Indian River Crime Laboratory.
What is your occupation?
I'm a criminalist assigned to the DNA unit.
What is your current role that you have?
As a criminalist in DNA, I screen items of evidence for the presence of biological fluid and material. This would include blood, semen, saliva, and hairs. I then attempt to develop DNA profiles from those items of evidence, perform DNA testing, write reports, and testify when needed.
To become a criminologist, what type of education do you have?
I have a Bachelor's of Science degree in psychology from the University of Colorado. With this degree, I completed coursework in biochemistry, molecular biology, genetics, and statistics. I also obtained minors in biology and astrophysics. In addition to that, I have a Master's of Science degree in forensic science from the University of Florida.
After getting your degrees, where did you become employed?
I began my employment with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement in the Fort Myers Regional Operations Center.
What year did you start with FDLE?
Would have been January of 2012.
Is FDLE a state crime lab?
Yes.
And are items of evidence sent to FDLE for testing?
Yes.
Was your role specifically to biological testing?
Yes, that's correct.
And do they also have testing for drugs?
Yes, it has a full suite of forensic analysis.
So firearms, drugs?
Yes.
Now, how long were you with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement before going to your current agency?
I was there for approximately 8.5 years.
What specialized training do you have that prepared you for your duties as an analyst?
When I began my employment with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, I underwent an approximately year-long training program. This training was broken into two main phases. The first phase involved me learning about the theories behind all the testing that I would be performing. I took practical exams and written exams to prove my competency in performing the tests that I would be employing. The second phase of that training involved working on actual items of evidence under the supervision of another qualified analyst.
Now, were you required to attend continuing education through your employment at FDLE?
Yes.
What did that training entail?
Part of the requirements for the laboratory to maintain its accreditation is for analysts in the DNA unit to undergo continuing education. This is a minimum of 8 hours every year, and it essentially involves going to an outside training where you learn about current topics in the field. Typically, most analysts will attend much more than 8 hours per year, but that's the minimum requirement.
Now, you mentioned accreditation. What did you mean by accreditation?
Accreditation is a public statement of the laboratory in which the laboratory is stating that it meets and maintains a set of internationally recognized standards set forth for the science labs.
Now, is FDLE accredited?
Yes, they are.
And who accredits that agency?
They are accredited by ANAB, which stands for the American National Standards Institute National Accreditation Board.
Were you required to undergo proficiency testing?
Yes.
And what is proficiency testing?
Proficiency testing is another way that I can demonstrate my ability to perform the testing that I employ as part of my job. What will happen is an outside agency will provide DNA samples to me, and they know the results of that DNA testing. I do not know the end result. I'll perform DNA testing on those samples just as I would in casework and submit my answers to that outside company who will inform me if I essentially got the correct answers or not.
How often is that proficiency testing done?
It's required to be completed twice a year.
So through your course of employment at FDLE, did you undergo those proficiency tests twice a year?
Yes.
Did you ever fail such a test?
No.
Are all the tests and analysis you perform validated and generally accepted in the forensic community?
Yes.
Could you just, DNA is something we hear a lot about on the news, but could you just describe what actually is DNA?
DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid, and just put very simply, it's a blueprint that gives your body and organisms a set of instructions on how to carry out its day-to-day functions.
Where is DNA found in the human body?
DNA is found in every single cell inside of your body, with the exception of red blood cells.
Can anyone have the same DNA?
Identical twins can have the same DNA profile, yes.
What type of DNA testing do you perform?
I perform something called STR DNA analysis. STR is just an acronym that stands for short tandem repeat. And a short tandem repeat is essentially just a piece of your DNA that will repeat itself over and over again. The number of times that this piece repeats itself is different from one person to another. So throughout my testing, I take advantage of that to be able to distinguish from one individual to another.
Now, how do you go about getting a DNA profile from a biological sample?
I would undergo the DNA analysis process.
Okay. And are controls used in the testing process?
Yes, they are.
What is a control?
A control, there are two different types. There's something called a positive control and a negative control. These are items that I perform DNA testing alongside whatever evidence samples I'm working. And they ensure that my testing is working properly. So a positive control is a DNA sample in which I know what the DNA should be. So when I perform DNA testing on the sample, at the end of the testing, I should get an expected result. If that happens, then I know that all of my chemical reactions and all of my testing worked as I expected it to. On the flip side of that is a negative control. A negative control is a sample that does not have any DNA in it. So when I go through my testing procedures, at the very end, that sample should contain no DNA. And that ensures that no contamination occurred during my testing.
What happens if those controls don't work properly?
If the controls don't work properly, then as an analyst, I would reassess what went wrong, and the testing would be reperformed.
Did you have the opportunity to analyze evidence in a case that involved Wade Wilson, Christine Melton, and Diane Ruiz?
Yes.
How did you come to be assigned to or involved in this particular case?
It was assigned to me by my supervisor.
Now, when you get a case assigned to you by your supervisor, are you given any details as to why those items of evidence are sent to FDLE?
Typically for DNA testing, yes, I am made aware of certain case scenarios or circumstances.
What is the reason for getting that information?
The biggest reason is to help me decide how I'm going to test an item. So just to give you a very generic example, say that an investigator submitted a bed sheet to me for DNA testing. With no background information, I don't know what to do with that bed sheet. I might assume maybe a sexual assault took place, so I'm looking for any semen. But what if in reality it was used in the course of a homicide and a body was wrapped up in that bedding, and they're looking for maybe the DNA of someone who could have wrapped the body in a bed sheet? I wouldn't know that without that type of information, and I can't perform every single type of testing on every single item of evidence. So for that reason, we need additional information to help guide the testing.
So would that additional information also guide you where you might want to swab on that piece of evidence?
Exactly.
Were you sent a number of pieces of evidence to analyze in this case?
Yes.
Now, sometimes when items of evidence are sent to you, do you just receive swabs that are from swabbing a piece of evidence?
Yes.
And then other times are you sent actual physical items for you to swab?
Yes.
Were you sent a number of physical items in this case for you to determine where you might want to swab?
Yes, I was.
Now I want to start, and let me ask you this too. Does FDLE have a certain number of items of evidence that they'll accept for testing at a time?
Yes, there is an evidence submission policy.
And what is the point of an an evidence submission policy? Why is it narrowed down to a certain number of pieces?
It's the biggest thing is to help in the expedition of getting things tested in a timely manner. If it was left to investigators, they would probably submit hundreds of items of evidence to be tested. Unfortunately, that costs a lot of money and takes a lot of time. So in order to get answers quicker, there's a submission policy that's implemented.
Now, once those items are tested, are investigators allowed to send more items of evidence to test if it's relevant?
Yes.
Now, if FDLE receives items that would identify a perpetrator, is it typical for you to continue to receive more items of evidence if a DNA hit has already come back?
That would not be typical, but it depends on case circumstances.
So would you say that one of the main advantages or reasons for DNA is in order to identify people?
Yes.
Now, I want to start with the case involving Christine Melton. What items of evidence were you initially sent?
Initially, I was sent buccal swabs from Wade Wilson. A buccal swab is a swab that's from the inside of somebody's cheek, and it's used so that I can develop a DNA profile from that item to make comparisons to any crime scene samples that I obtained DNA from. In addition to that, I obtained 2 tied shirts, a shirt, a pair of jeans, a bathing suit top that were tied together, along with an additional untied shirt, a curtain rod, and a blood stain card from Christine Melton. A blood stain card is blood that's collected at autopsy, again used very similar to how I would use a buccal swab. It's used to develop a DNA profile from that so that I have the DNA from the individual it came from to make comparisons to evidence.
So the unknown items of evidence from the scene, is it your goal to develop a known profile from each of those items of evidence?
Yes, if any DNA is present, obtain a DNA profile from those evidence items.
And then ultimately, do you compare the profile from something from a scene or an item of evidence sent to you to those known samples that you've created?
Yes.
Now, in this case, you mentioned there was a buccal swab from Wade Wilson. Why is the swab taken from the cheek? Is there any scientific reason for the DNA coming from there?
It's a very DNA-rich portion of your body, and it's easier to collect than blood.
Now, when you received these items of evidence, did they appear to be properly packaged and sealed?
Yes.
And was there an identifying case number from the agency on each of those items?
Yes.
Now, did you give each exhibit an identifying FDLE number?
Yes, when evidence comes into the laboratory, it gets an FDLE lab case number associated with it, and each item gets a unique exhibit number.
And may I approach the witness?
You may.
I'm going to approach you and show you an item that's already been introduced into evidence, State's Exhibit 38. Do you recognize this exhibit?
Yes, I do.
What is this exhibit?
These are buccal swabs from Wade Wilson.
And are your initials and date on that item of evidence?
Yes, they are.
This red tape, if you can just show right here, this red tape that's on that envelope, is that from Florida Department of Law Enforcement?
This tape up here is no, that would be from an original seal from the submitting agency. The red tape along the bottom is my seal after I completed my testing.
Okay, thank you. Now, when you received the buccal swabs from Wade Wilson, were you able to complete a DNA profile of that swab?
Yes, I obtained a complete DNA profile.
And how were you able to do that?
I performed the DNA testing process on that item.
And what does that DNA testing process entail?
The first step would be to actually take a sample for DNA testing. So I'm actually cutting a little piece of the swab that was submitted. And then the next step is to actually access the DNA. In order to do that, I need to break open the cells. So I use heat and chemicals to break open the cells to get to the DNA. Once I've done that, I need to know how much DNA is present in my sample. That's because the chemical reaction that I'm going to perform needs a certain amount of DNA present. So I like to refer to it kind of like Goldilocks. Too little DNA is not good. Too much DNA is also not good for my process. I need just the right amount. I have to know how much DNA is present in order to know the right amount to use for my chemical reaction. That next chemical reaction is where I actually will make millions of copies of the DNA. I'm making copies of the areas that I'm testing for. DNA is very small, so by making the millions of copies of it, I'm making it so that I can visualize this at a later step in my process. That next step is to put it on an instrument that will separate it and generate graphical data that I, as an analyst, will look at and make my determinations from.
At this time, I'd seek to move States Exhibit 38, the buccal swabs from Wade Wilson, into evidence.
Any objection?
No objection.
Be admitted.
May I approach, Your Honor?
You may.
Sir, I'm approaching you and showing you States Exhibit 15, which has already been shown. If you could just take a look and tell me if you recognize this exhibit.
Yes, I do.
What is this exhibit?
This is the blood stain card from Christine Melton.
And how are you able to recognize this exhibit?
By the FTLE case number, the item number, and my handwritten initials on it.
And at this time, the state would move exhibit number 15 into evidence.
No objection.
Be admitted.
Now, with this blood stain card, were you able to come up with a complete DNA profile for Christine Melton?
Yes, I was.
I'm going to approach you and show you some items of clothing. There's some gloves if you need over to your right. And the first item I'm showing you is States Exhibit 16. And then the second item is States Exhibit 17. If you could start by looking at States Exhibit 16 and tell me if you recognize it.
Yes, I do.
Okay, and how are you able to recognize this exhibit?
On the outside of the packaging is the FTLE case number, exhibit number, and my handwritten initials, and then I recognize the items inside.
Now, obviously, this was opened in court, but when you received it, it was packaged and sealed.
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time, the state would move Exhibit 16 into evidence.
16 was what?
The shirts, the wrap bedding,
Two tight
black,
shirts.
white, and gray tied shirts.
No objection.
Be admitted.
And I'll have you look at States Exhibit 17.
Okay.
Do you recognize States Exhibit 17?
Yes, I do.
How are you able to recognize that?
Same as before, the FTLE case number, the item number, my handwritten initials, and the contents inside the bag.
Your Honor, at this time, the state would move 17 into evidence.
No objection.
Admitted.
I want to start by asking you what you did with these items of clothing and bedding that you received.
Okay, so as alluded to before, I received case information that these items were potentially used in the tying up of some kind of apparatus or the victim herself. And so the area of note on these items of clothing were any DNA that might be on the knotted portions. So to start, this first package is two tied shirts. They were knotted together at the sleeves. There were two knots. So what I did was I start by performing just a visual examination of the evidence. Though I know I'm focusing on the knots, I am still going to give a visual exam to the entire of the item to see if there's any characteristic staining that would potentially warrant testing for bodily fluids. In this case, I did actually perform a chemical color change test for the possible presence of semen. Sexual assault was potentially suspected in this case, and there was staining that warranted potential testing for semen. In this instance, the items were negative for the presence of semen. The next thing I did was collect potential hairs from these exhibits. So the shirts had what appeared to be hairs. I'm saying what appeared to be because I didn't actually examine them with a microscope, which is how I would confirm that they were hairs. These possible hairs were collected and then returned to the original package and a separate little envelope that I have in here. That would be for any possible future testing if for some reason the hairs needed to be examined. After that, I focused on the knots of the shirts. So what I did is go to the first knot and I swabbed it for any potential DNA that would be on the outside portion of the knot. That then became my first sample. I then untied that same exact knot and then took a separate swab and swabbed the inside portion of the knot. That then became my second sample. And then I repeated this process for the second knot that was present on these items. Swabbed the outside of the second knot, untied it, and then swabbed the inside of that knot.
How many knots total on those shirts did you examine?
Can I refer to my notes?
That will refresh your recollection, yes.
I believe it's 2, but I just want to verify in my bench notes for you. Yes, it was 2 total knots for this first item.
Could you please pull that first item out and just show the jurors that item?
So this is the possible hair package that's in here that I told you I collected.
While you're pulling that out, is hair something that's very easy to test for DNA?
It's not difficult to test for DNA, but it's not commonly performed at DNA testing just because a lot of hair is shed on your body throughout the day. Approximately 200 to 300 hairs can be shed in a day. And typically those shed hairs are dead, and dead hairs don't contain the type of DNA that I'm looking for. I'm looking for hairs that are in an actively growing phase, and usually those have to be ripped out to find those. So most times I don't even examine hairs unless there's something about a case circumstance that would suggest I should. So shirt 1. Shirt 2. They were both knotted by their sleeves together at each of the sleeves.
So these shirts that you're holding up are after you've untied them.
Yes.
So let's talk about the knot. Is it 2A? Is that the right reference that I'm using?
Yes.
First knot? Okay. So for 2A, were you able to obtain DNA results from that knot?
Yes, I was.
And were you able to compare the profile from 2A to the profiles of Wade Wilson and the profile of Christine Melton?
Yes.
What were the results of the comparison?
So to start, the actual result of my testing on that knot, it demonstrated a presence of a mixture consistent with 2 individuals, including at least 1 male. So what that means is that there's DNA from 2 people on that knot, and at least one of them is male. Once I obtain that result, I then do the comparison to Wade Wilson and Christine Melton. And Wade Wilson is included as a possible contributor to the mixed DNA profile, and Christine Melton is included as a possible contributor to the mixed DNA profile.
Now, were you able to put a statistical significance to those comparisons?
Yes.
What is that statistical significance?
So to lay a little bit of groundwork for you, because I can't DNA test every single person in this world who has lived, is living, and will ever live, I can never 100% say that something is someone's DNA. Because I can't do that, I have to calculate some type of statistic that will give you some weight to this inclusion. I do that by the use of something called a likelihood ratio. A likelihood ratio compares the probability of getting my DNA under two different explanations. So the first explanation, as an example, when I'm comparing Wade Wilson to this DNA, it would be what's the probability of the DNA if Wade Wilson is the source of it along with someone else, because it's a two-person mixture. The alternative explanation is what's the probability of the DNA if someone unrelated to him is the source of the DNA. The higher the number that I report is, the greater the support there is for that first explanation, the inclusion explanation, if someone is the source of it. So with that groundwork laid, when I compared Wade Wilson, the observed DNA profile is greater than 700 billion times more likely to occur if the sample originated from Wade Wilson and one unrelated individual than if it originated from two unrelated individuals.
Okay, so you said 700 billion?
Greater than 700 billion.
Is 700 billion the cap that you use, the highest number you use?
At FDLE, a procedure is to cap the number at 700 billion.
Now, about how many people are there now in this world?
Approximately 7 to 8 billion.
Now, this result you just gave, that was from the first knot untied, is that correct?
No, this would be from the first knot as it was tied.
Okay, so then you untied it and swabbed that, is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay, so is that 2B?
Yes.
Were you able to obtain DNA results from 2B, so that untied knot?
Yes, I was.
And were you able to compare the profile from 2B to the profile of Wade Wilson and Christine Melton?
Yes, and just to back up, I never gave you the statistic for Christine Melton on the knot that was before it was untied. It's a very similar number. The DNA profile is greater than 700 billion times more likely to occur if the sample originated from Christine Melton and one unknown unrelated individual than from two unrelated individuals.
So the profile that you were able to compare to Wade Wilson and Christine Melton from 2B, what were the results of that comparison?
Item 2B demonstrated the presence of a mixture consistent with two individuals. Wade Wilson and Christine Melton are both included as possible contributors to that mixture. And the observed DNA profile is greater than 700 billion times more likely to occur if the sample originated from Wade Wilson and one unrelated individual than if it originated from two unrelated individuals. And then likewise with Christine Melton, the observed DNA profile is greater than 700 billion times more likely to occur if it originated from Christine Melton and one unrelated individual than if it originated from two unrelated individuals.
Okay, so those are the results from the outside and the inside of knot 1?
Yes.
Okay, so let's go to the second knot. Is that 2C?
Yes.
So is 2C, did you swab from the outside of that knot?
Yes.
Were you able to obtain a DNA profile or DNA profiles from that knot?
Yes, I was.
And were you able to compare the profiles from 2C to the profiles of Wade Wilson and Christine Melton?
Yes.
What were the results of the comparisons you did?
Okay, so the results from the knot itself demonstrated the presence of a mixture consistent with three individuals, including at least one male. Wade Wilson and Christine Melton are both included as possible contributors to that mixed DNA profile. The observed DNA profile is greater than 700 billion times more likely to occur if it originated from Wade Wilson and two unrelated individuals than if it originated from three unrelated individuals. Likewise, for Christine Melton, the observed mixed DNA profile is greater than 700 billion times more likely to occur if it originated from Christine Melton and two unrelated individuals than if it originated from three unrelated individuals.
Now the second knot, did you untie it and swab the inside of that second knot?
Yes.
Were you able to obtain any DNA profiles from that second knot?
Yes, I was.
And were you able then to compare those DNA profiles to the profile of Wade Wilson and Christine Melton?
Yes.
What were the results of that comparison?
Okay, the results from item 2D demonstrated the presence of a mixture consistent with 4 individuals, including at least 1 male. Wade Wilson and Christine Melton are both included as possible contributors to the mixed DNA profile. For Wade Wilson, the observed DNA profile is greater than 700 billion times more likely to occur if it originated from Wade Wilson and 3 unrelated individuals than if it originated from 4 unrelated individuals. For Christine Melton, similar. The observed mixed DNA profile is greater than 700 billion times more likely to occur if it originated from Christine Melton and 3 unrelated individuals than if it originated from 4 unrelated individuals.
Now, did that complete your testing for those 2 shirts tied together?
Yes, it did.
What was the next item or clothing item that you tested?
The next clothing items would have been the tied shirt, jeans, and bathing suit top with the untied shirt.
Is that 3A? Is that one of those knots 3A from that?
Yes.
Could you please show the jurors the items of clothing that you tested next?
Okay.
I can just approach Your Honor. I'll
Okay.
take that.
The pair of jeans. One of the shirts. The bathing suit top. And the other garment.
Now there's 4 pieces, is that correct?
Yes.
Were all 4 of those pieces knotted together?
No, they were not.
Okay. What parts were knotted together?
The shirt that I showed you that had the small hoodie attached to it was tied to the pair of jeans. Also tied to the pair of jeans was the bathing suit top, which itself also had some knots done within itself. The other shirt was not tied to these items.
So let's talk about the first knot you tested, 3A. Which knot was this?
3A is the knot that was connecting the shirt to the jeans.
And were you able to complete any DNA profiles from the outside of that knot?
Yes, I was.
Were you then able to compare the profile from that knot to the profiles of Wade Wilson and Christine Melton?
Yes.
What were the results of that comparison?
The knot 3A demonstrated the presence of a mixture consistent with 3 donors, including at least 1 male. Wade Wilson and Christine Melton are both included as possible contributors to that DNA profile. For Wade Wilson, the observed DNA profile is greater than 700 billion times more likely to occur if the sample originated from Wade Wilson and 2 unrelated individuals than if it originated from 3 unrelated individuals. For Christine Melton, the observed DNA profile is greater than 700 billion times more likely to occur if it originated from Christine Melton and 2 unrelated individuals than if it originated from 3 unrelated individuals.
Did you then swab the inside of that knot once you'd untied it?
Yes, I did.
And again, this is the pants and the gray hoodie?
Yes.
Now, were you able to obtain DNA profiles once that knot was untied?
Yes, I was.
Did you then compare that DNA profile to the profiles of Wade Wilson and Christine Melton?
Yes.
What were the results of that comparison?
The results were the exact same as the untied portion of that knot. So I obtained a mixture consistent with 3 individuals, including at least 1 male. Wade Wilson and Christine Melton are both included as possible contributors to that mixture. For Wade Wilson, the observed DNA profile is greater than 700 billion times more likely to occur if it originated from Wade Wilson and 2 unrelated individuals than if it originated from 3 unrelated individuals. For Christine Melton, a billion times more likely to occur if the sample originated from Christine Melton and 2 unrelated individuals than if it originated from 3 unrelated individuals.
Now, you mentioned another knot. What 2 items of clothing were knotted together? Or not for 3C?
Yes, the next knot, which would be the second knot on this cluster, was the knot that was connecting the jeans to the bathing suit top.
Were you able to get a DNA profile from the outside of that knot connecting the bathing suit top to, it was the jeans you said?
Yes.
Okay. Were you able to get a DNA profile?
Yes.
And were you able then to compare that with Christine Melton and Wade Wilson?
Yes, I was.
And what were the results of that comparison?
This knot demonstrated the presence of a mixture consistent with 3 donors, including at least 1 male. Wade Wilson and Christine Melton are both included as possible donors to that mixture. Wade Wilson, for him, the statistic is that the mixed DNA profile is greater than 700 billion times more likely to occur if it originated from Wade Wilson and 2 unrelated individuals than if it originated from 3 unrelated individuals. For Christine Melton, the DNA profile is greater than 700 billion times more likely to occur if it originated from Christine Melton and 2 unrelated people than if it originated from 3 unrelated people.
Now, did you untie those items of clothing and swab the inside of that knot?
Yes, I did.
Were you able to obtain DNA profile from untying that knot?
Yes, I was.
And did you compare that profile to the profiles of Wade Wilson and Christine Melton?
Yes.
What were the results of that comparison?
The results are the same as the untied portion of the knot. A mixture consistent with 3 people was obtained, including at least 1 male. Wade Wilson and Christine Melton are both included as possible donors to that mixture. For Wade Wilson, the DNA profile is greater than 700 billion times more likely to occur if it originated from him with 2 other people than if it came from 3 unrelated people. For Christine Melton, the DNA profile is greater than 700 billion times more likely to occur if the sample originated from her and 2 unrelated people than if it originated from 3 unrelated people.
Now, were those the only knots you tested on those 3 items of clothing?
No, there were additional knots.
Okay, so let's talk about the next knot. That would be 3E.
Yes, this would be the 3rd knot with this cluster of clothing.
Okay, and where was the 3rd knot located?
This was on the left back strap of the bathing suit
And where was that tied to?
itself.
Just itself. Okay, so did you swab the outside of that knot on the bathing suit?
Yes.
Were you able to develop a profile?
Yes, I was.
Did you compare that profile to Wade Wilson and Christine Melton?
Yes.
What were the results of that comparison?
This knot demonstrated the presence of a mixture consistent with 3 individuals, including at least 1 male. Wade Wilson and Christine Melton are both included as possible contributors to that mixed DNA profile. For Wade Wilson, the observed DNA profile is approximately 5.1 billion times more likely to occur if it originated from Wade Wilson and 2 unrelated people than if it originated from 3 unrelated people. For Christine Melton, the DNA profile is approximately 2.1 million times more likely to occur if it originated from Christine Melton and 2 unrelated people than if it originated from 3 unrelated people.
Now, did you mention there was another knot in that bathing suit?
Yes,
Okay, and is that 3F?
it is 3G.
3G. Okay, so what is 3F? What knot is that?
That is the untied portion of the knot I just talked about.
Okay, and if you could, were you able to develop a profile from the untied portion of that knot?
Yes, I was.
Did you compare that profile to Wade Wilson and Christine Melton?
Yes.
And what were your results of that?
There was a mixture that demonstrated the presence of a mixture consistent with 3 donors, including at least 1 male.
Okay.
I
And-
then
go ahead.
compared the 2. Wade Wilson and Christine Melton are both included as possible donors to that mixture. For Wade Wilson, the observed DNA profile is greater than 700 billion times more likely to occur if the sample originated from him and 2 unrelated people than if it was from 3 unrelated people. For Christine Melton, the DNA profile is greater than 700 billion times more likely to occur if it originated from her and 2 unrelated people than if it originated from 3 unrelated people.
Let's talk about then that second knot on the bathing suit, 3G, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So were you able to swab the outside of that knot and obtain a profile?
Yes, I was.
Did you then compare that profile to Christine Melton and Wade Wilson?
Yes.
What were the results of that comparison?
This knot demonstrated the presence of a mixture consistent with 2 donors, including at least 1 male. Wade Wilson and Christine Melton are both included as possible donors to that mixture. For Wade Wilson, the DNA profile is greater than 700 billion times more likely to occur if the sample originated from Wade Wilson and an additional unrelated person than if it originated from 2 unrelated people. For Christine Melton, the observed DNA profile is greater than 700 billion times more likely to occur if it originated from her and 1 unrelated person than if it originated from 2 unrelated people.
Did you then untie that knot and swab the inside of that knot?
Yes.
And is that 3H?
Yes, it is.
And were you able to obtain a profile from that knot?
Yes.
And did you compare that profile to Wade Wilson and Christine Melton?
Yes.
What were the results of that comparison?
This demonstrated the presence of a mixture consistent with 2 donors, including at least 1 male. Other limited data which is not interpretable was observed in this sample and may suggest the possibility of additional contributor to this DNA profile. So what that means is rarely I can get DNA signal from that could indicate that another person is present in this sample, but it's not a lot of data. Because it's not a lot of data, I can't make any comparisons to it. It could be DNA, it could actually be a technical artifact of the testing process that I perform. Because of that, it's not interpretable. So then I compared Wade Wilson and Christine Melton to this mixture. Wade Wilson and Christine Melton are both included as possible contributors to that mixture. For Wade Wilson, the observed DNA profile is greater than 700 billion times more likely to occur if the sample originated from him and 1 unrelated individual than if it was from 2 unrelated people. For Christine Melton, the DNA profile is greater than 700 billion times more likely to occur if the sample originated from her and 1 unrelated person than from 2 unrelated people.
Now, did that conclude your testing of the clothing, the knots?
Yes, it did.
May I approach, Your Honor?
You may.
For the record, I'm approaching the witness. I'm going to show you State's Exhibit 18 and ask that you just take a look at State's Exhibit 18. Do you recognize State's Exhibit 18?
Yes, I do.
And how do you recognize 18?
The FDLE item number, the case number, and my handwritten initials.
And at this time, the state will move 18 into evidence.
No objection.
Be admitted.
I'd ask that you just pull out and publish what is inside of that. And what is this item, sir?
This is the curtain rod.
Okay, and were you able to test this curtain rod?
Yes, I was.
And how did you choose which areas to test?
Okay, so similar as to before, based off of the case scenario, it was alleged that this was potentially used in a homicide or potential sexual assault. And so what I was doing with this item is looking first for the possible presence of semen. In this case, it was negative for the presence of semen. The next thing I did was test this for possible blood. So on this portion of the rod, it's difficult to see now because I have swabbed it, but there was staining that's consistent with what looks to be potential blood. So I perform a chemical color change test for the possible presence of blood. This is only a presumptive test. It can't confirm blood to the exclusion of all other substances, but it's just a test that can guide my DNA testing to see where I might want to perform DNA analysis. That gave positive indications for the possible presence of blood, so I swabbed that staining at this portion of the rod.
Now, I'm just going to ask for the record, the portion of the rod you're pointing to looks like maybe the top of the rod with a little hook.
Yes, the hook that would connect towards the top of the blinds.
And what was the other area that you chose to swab?
The next area would be where I would expect maybe someone to be holding or using this item. So I swabbed this portion just to see if there's any DNA present on this portion of the rod.
Now, item 4, were you able to obtain DNA results from this item?
Yes, I was.
Were you able to create a profile?
Yes, I was.
And did you then compare that profile to the known profiles of Christine Melton and Wade Wilson?
Yes.
And when I say 4, is this the top of the rod or the bottom of the rod?
So 4 was split into 4A and 4B. 4A would be the staining that was at the top of the rod.
Okay, so what were the results for the profile from the staining at the top of the rod?
That it was a complete DNA profile that was consistent with a female individual.
And were you able to compare that DNA profile to Christine Melton?
Yes.
And what were the results of that?
The DNA profile from that staining matches the DNA from Christine Melton. The observed DNA profile is greater than 700 billion times more likely to occur if the sample originated from Christine Melton than if it originated from an unknown, unrelated individual.
Now, when you have an item of evidence that has a lot of blood on it or blood, can it often happen that that blood might mask other DNA that might be a part of that item?
It could be possible, yes.
Now, as far as the rod handle, were you able to obtain a DNA profile from the handle of that rod?
Yes, I was.
And is that part of 4B?
Yes, that is 4B.
And were you able to compare that profile to Christine Melton and Wade Wilson?
Yes.
And what were the results of that?
From the handle, it demonstrated the presence of a mixture consistent with 2 donors, including at least 1 male. Wade Wilson is included as a possible contributor to that DNA profile. The observed DNA profile is greater than 700 billion times more likely to occur if it originated from Wade Wilson and 1 unrelated person than if it was from 2 unrelated people. Christine Melton is also included as a possible donor to that mixture. The DNA is greater than 700 billion times more likely to occur if it originated from Christine Melton and 1 unrelated person than if it originated from 2 unrelated people.
Now, did that complete the testing then of that curtain rod?
Yes, it did.
Did you complete a report and detail these findings?
Yes.
And was that date of that report October 16, 2019?
Yes, it was.
May I approach, Your Honor?
You may.
Now, sir, when I asked you initially about the items of evidence that you received, was one of those, I don't know, did I introduce 18? Yeah, I did. One of those items I believe you said you received was a blood sample from, or I'm sorry, yes, passenger door swabs from blood sample. And it states Exhibit 33. I'm going to ask if you look at that and tell me if you recognize that exhibit.
Yes, I do.
And how do you recognize that exhibit?
By the FDLE case number, the item number, and my handwritten initials on it.
And at this time, the state would move 33 into evidence.
No objection.
Be admitted.
Did you also receive a blood stain card from Diane Ruiz?
Yes, I did.
May I approach, Your Honor?
You may.
The blood stain card, how is the blood, is it just like dabbed on the card, or how does that card actually work?
I don't actually know.
Okay, so you just know it's blood from that person and you're creating a profile.
Exactly.
So I'm going to show you, see it's Exhibit 32, and if you can tell me whether you recognize that exhibit.
Yes, I do.
And how do you recognize this exhibit?
The FDLE case number, the item number, and my handwritten initials.
At this time, the state would move 32 into evidence.
No
Objection.
objection.
Be admitted.
So let's start with State's Exhibit 32, the known DNA that you received. Were you able to develop a profile?
Yes, I was.
And then for State's Exhibit 33, which were the swabs from the interior passenger door, were you able to develop a profile for that?
Yes, I was.
Did you then compare those two profiles?
Yes.
What were the results of the compare? Actually, let's talk about this first. Did you also compare the DNA sample from the passenger, the blood on the passenger door, to Wade Wilson?
Not in this instance, no.
Okay, so just to Diane Ruiz.
Yes.
And what were the results of that?
The DNA results from that swab demonstrated the presence of a mixture of at least 2 people. A complete DNA profile for the major contributor could be determined and is suitable for comparisons. Due to the limited nature of the DNA results for the additional contributors, that data is not interpretable. So this sample is a little bit different than all the other ones that I've talked about. All of the other samples I talked about, there was enough DNA present on those items where I could make a definitive decision on how many people were present in those mixtures I obtained. Sometimes there can be DNA from one person in a very large amount, and then a very, very insignificant small portion of DNA that's left over. There's such little amount of DNA that's left over that I can't actually use that portion of it to make any comparisons to. But because there's DNA from someone in a much higher amount, I can compare to that portion of the sample. So that portion of the sample is what I have called in this report a major DNA profile. And that is what I made my comparison to Diane Ruiz from. The major DNA profile matches the DNA from Diane Ruiz. The observed major DNA profile is greater than 700 billion times more likely to occur if the sample originated from Diane Ruiz than from an unrelated person.
Now, did you also complete a report detailing your findings for that one?
Yes.
And was that a November 4th, 2019 report?
Yes.
Your Honor, may I have a moment?
Yes.
And at this time, the state tenders a witness.
All right.
Sir, did you test any other items than the ones you mentioned today?
Yes.
And were those consistent with Ms. Melton, Ms. Ruiz, or Mr. Wilson?
It would be easier to probably go through them individually. Yes, there were some inclusions with at least one of those individuals.
Were there exclusions?
Give me this one moment.
Sure.
Yes, sir, there were a range of outcomes. There were exclusions.
By exclusions, what do you mean? What are you saying are exclusions?
An exclusion is where I'm determining that someone is not contributing to the DNA profile. So when I make the comparison from their buccal swab or blood, I'm stating that those DNA profiles are not the same origin.
Did those DNA profiles come back to people other than Ms. Ruiz, Ms. Melton, or Mr. Wilson?
Not that I have identified, no.
It came back to other profiles.
Yes.
Did you receive swabbings from the front of a Nissan Versa?
Not from the outside of the car, no.
Just from the inside?
Yes.
Why do you use the phrase possible contributor?
It's just semantic-y. Again, as a DNA analyst, I can't say for sure that someone is or is not the source because I have not tested every single person in this world. So because of that, I can say they're a possible contributor and then provide the weight with a statistical calculation.
Thank you.
Okay. You read
Nothing
Rick?
further from the state. I'd ask that he be excused.
Any objection?
No objection.
All right, sir, you can step down. You're excused.